Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Before we begin, I just want to make a quick note. At the end of this episode, I spend the last 4 minutes walking through the way people work with me and where to find resources, my links, and my courses. If you are a returning listener or are already a client, you can absolutely skip that part. If you're new or trying to figure out what kind of support you need, it's there for you. It's the last 4 minutes. Thank you so much for being here. One of the things that I've learned in healing, and one of the things that broke me open the most, was how much of my past I continue to need to heal over time. And I think that as my daughter reached certain ages, new healing journeys came up for me, especially when she surpassed some ages that were really tough for me. And oh my God, I can't believe I am tearing up already. But didn't want to record this. I wrote it and I've been sitting on it, but I think it's important because I can't tell you how many people that I work with or talk to feel like there's something wrong with them. For being angry, for being traumatized, for healing. There was this post on the internet where everything is, and it said something about the angry daughter, which is really talking about like the scapegoat, the black sheep, and that's me. I've unwillingly fit that role my whole life. And it's not because I was angry, but because I was the one who could see what was happening. And I have never had the ability to pretend otherwise. I cannot gaslight myself, and I never have been able to. And sometimes I look at my daughter, who's older now than I was when my child abuse began. And I wonder how anyone could look at somebody so small and decide that she's the problem. From really early on, I learned that my clarity made me a problem and made me the monster. And so even when I was young and calling out patterns or naming what wasn't okay, I was called rude. And so saying something that felt unfair meant I was making things harder, quote unquote, for everybody else. And when something didn't make sense and I said so, the issue stopped being about the situation and became all about my reaction to it. And so slowly, I learned that my role wasn't to be understood, but it was to just absorb everything in silence. And I became the one who stayed regulated while others were allowed to be overwhelmed. And I had to adjust why they reacted. And when I reacted, which I did a lot, I was wrong. Everybody else could be their messy, dysregulated, and abusive selves. And I could not misinterpret, could not be tired, could not be confused because someone had to keep things moving or they just had to be wrong. It's essentially the definition of being the scapegoat. So when I reached my limit, when my body, my voice finally said no, that's when the story about me hardened from my family. I wasn't responding to reality anymore. I was angry. I was dramatic. I needed to let go. I was cast into a role that I didn't even believe. And for a long time, I pushed it away and I put my childhood in a box that I only opened up in therapy, but I was always triggered by it. And sometimes I'd watch a movie and it would detail my exact history for a moment, and I would just let myself feel all the sadness inside. But within the last few years, I started to see how I'm still cast in that role, even though I have literally escaped numerous versions of abusive relationships. I would try and explain something simple, a timing issue, a capacity issue, a logistical limit, and suddenly the conversation would shift, and it was no longer about what was actually happening, but it was my tone, my delivery, my attitude. My reality is always secondary to how uncomfortable it made other people feel. And so in relationships and in my family, I just chose to be silent, which to others may seem like not silent, but I was not saying how I was feeling anymore. I would bring up my disappointment or respond, but I never would talk about how deeply sad and how deeply triggered I was. And this is because within the last 2 years, I realized that I started disappearing internally at a really young age, and I think younger than I thought. I stopped trusting my own reactions, and I told myself I was too dramatic or too sensitive, or that other people had it harder and I should be able to handle more. I learned to override my own instincts and overfunction. I'm a really good workaholic, but that's at the cost of my sleep, my health, my work, my body. And that's what the angry daughter actually looks like. It's not volatile. She's not irrational. She's the scapegoat. She's the person a system assigns its tension to so that the system doesn't change. When something is unsatiable, she names it. When expectations are uneven, she feels it. And when help doesn't arrive, she just notices that, because acknowledging those truths would require accountability and the system does something easier, it just turns her into the problem. And anger is the most convenient label because it dismisses any content without engaging. Once she's angry, no one has to ask, is what she's saying even true? She's angry, therefore she's wrong. Over time, the angry daughter begins to believe the story about herself. And I think that's the most damaging thing that I've ever realized, is that when you are abused, especially early on, you're taught not to trust yourself. And then you get older and people talk about self-love. And it's like, I don't even know who I am. How are you telling me to love myself? I hate myself. I've been taught to hate myself. Every time I've ever felt good about myself, I was told I was wrong. And every time that I was quote unquote wrong, it was as if I couldn't come back from that ever. I didn't get to be a kid. But abuse causes you to doubt your own perceptions. It causes you to invalidate your own feelings before anybody has to. And you keep overdoing, overgiving, overfunctioning because you were taught explicitly and implicitly that you're the problem. And it took me 30 years to see I'm not the angry daughter, but I'm a person. I wasn't angry when I spoke up. I was naming what was happening. And I wasn't angry when I needed limits. I was responding to my capacity. And I wasn't angry when I stopped accommodating everybody else's emotions at the expense of my own and of my child. I was exhausted from a lifetime of being required to function while others were allowed to fall apart. But I stopped volunteering, and maybe never did volunteer to be erased. I refused to keep holding when nobody else would. I chose to keep seeing the truth so my daughter doesn't become quote unquote angry. I see it really clearly now, even though it hurts. And over the winter, I was in Times Square during Christmas week. And if you know anything about New York at all or Times Square, just don't go ever. But we went to see Wicked and it was freezing, super packed, overstimulating. And even as a New Yorker, it's the worst place to be in the holidays. And my child was exhausted and melting down in a way any nervous system would. I was already depleted, running on fumes from chaos of the day and trying to do math in my head when I need to be up the next day and how long it takes to get home and how many blocks to the subway and how many freaking people am I going to bump into until I get there. And instead of anyone slowing down, instead of anybody asking what I needed, the pressure increased that I need to get it right. I can't be dysregulated right now. I can't have a feeling from my own family. I didn't even name that I was at a breaking point. I thought it was obvious by the circumstances. My child was screaming at me. But then I realized I'm required to function perfectly. And in that moment, I felt it land in my body in a way that it never had. If I don't absorb this quietly, I'm become the problem. I've been talking with a client about how she isn't the scapegoat and she isn't angry. She's the truth teller. I had that in the back of my mind as I thought about the angry daughter, and the angry daughter isn't out of control. She isn't the one who sees patterns, doesn't do anything about it. She's the one that does, and she doesn't pretend not to. She names the double standards instead of shrinking herself around them, and she stops cushioning her truth so other people don't have to feel uncomfortable. And eventually she says, this isn't sustainable. And that's when the role becomes visible. In families and systems, there's always someone assigned to hold what nobody wants to hold. And that person absorbs tension, carries the blame, and makes everybody else feel functional. Instead of addressing what she's pointing to, the system relocates the problem into her personality. She's angry. What looks like anger is often exhaustion that's finally reached the surface. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being erased. And the system survives because the angry daughter learns not to trust herself. And she stops validating her own experience. And she overfunctions and overdoes because she was taught that listening to herself would cost her connection. So she doesn't. She learns not to trust her reactions, her limits, her body. I'm not the angry daughter the way people mean it. I'm the angry daughter, or the daughter who learned to survive by seeing clearly. And I'm the person who finally told the truth about what it cost. And if stepping out of that role makes me harder to live with or be around, it's only because I'm not disappearing to make it easier for everybody else. I did a part 2 to this about dating, which is kind of what sparked some of this, but I am going to save that for another episode. But once that is up, I will tag it in the show notes. It's going to come out after this one. And I share this because I don't pretend to be perfect or healed. And my clients know that. I don't walk into anything like, oh, I'm perfect. I don't think that about myself, so I don't act that way. I'm not writing from some distant place on the other side of this. I'm writing as someone who has lived it, named it, and continues to choose herself inside of it still. And I work with people healing from all forms of emotional abuse, not by fixing them, but by helping them understand what happened and reconnect to themselves. And so if this is helpful, if you hear yourself in this, I just want you to know that you are not alone. And I hope that this was helpful. If this episode resonated and you're realizing that what you're dealing with isn't just stress or miscommunication, there are ways to get support that don't minimize what you're experiencing. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes telling you about my offerings, because at the core of my business is one-on-one coaching. The podcast is something that I do because I do like being able to help a broader audience. But the truth is that the core of my work is really coaching and providing other offerings so that people can begin to heal. At the center of everything I do is one-on-one coaching. That's where I slow things down, listen closely, and help you make sense of what's happening in your specific situation. It's not a template. It's not just based on theories, but it's really focused on your real life. Some people start with a one-time validation call. That is a single focus session where we look at one specific situation or pattern that you're struggling with. And the goal isn't to fix your life or push you into decisions. It's to help you name what's happening, put it into context of reality, help you notice where you are in it, and offer some feedback and tools to how to navigate it. I also offer an intro call. The intro call used to be called a clarity call, and it's a short call where you can share what's going on for you, and I can explain how I work and whether I'm the right fit for your situation. There's no obligation to continue after that. It's simply a way for us to get on the same page before moving forward. For people who need ongoing support, I offer weekly or biweekly coaching. This is especially helpful if you're navigating emotional abuse, trauma bond, high conflict divorce, or custody and co-parenting with a difficult or controlling person. Ongoing work allows us to track patterns over time, stay anchored when things escalate, and make decisions in a way that protects your nervous system and your long-term stability. All of my coaching options can be found on my websites, emotionalabusecoach.com and highconflictdivorcecoaching.com. Both links are available in the show notes of this episode. In addition to one-on-one coaching, I offer several self-paced courses and programs. They're called Divorcing a Narcissist 101, How to Document for Family Court, the Emotional Abuse Breakthrough Course, Setting Boundaries with a Narcissist, and Unhooked, which is my program and private podcast that walks you through the full cycle of abuse, helps you map it out in your relationship, and shows you how to begin to break free from the trauma bond. I also write on Substack, where I explore topics like trauma bonding, emotional abuse, coercive control, high conflict divorce, and the cluster B dynamics. There's a free option and a paid membership that offers deeper dives, Q&As, and additional resources. Everything that I do and everything that I built is around one core truth and message that you're not crazy, you shouldn't feel crazy, and that even though I can see patterns in what you're experiencing, it doesn't mean that it's normal. It's not healthy. My work is really about helping you understand what's happening and begin to trust yourself again. All of the links that I shared are in my show notes. and I really appreciate you being here.